Blackwell Forgiven. Taken as a hostage, Lady Juliana of Thornwick was brought before Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the man responsible for her father's downfall. She met his gaze, expecting cruelty, but saw something else entirely. "You are my prisoner, my lady," he murmured. "But tell me, why do you not look at me with fear?" Chapter 1. The Lion's Denver. The heavy oak door creaked shut, the sound echoing through the vast, cold chamber like a death knell. Lady Juliana of Thornwick stood alone, the scent of damp stone and old iron filling her nostrils, a stark contrast to the rose-scented gardens she had known only days before. Her fingers, still raw from the rough hemp of the ropes that had bound her, clenched into fists at her sides. She would not cower. Not before him. The journey had been brutal, a whirlwind of clashing steel, terrified screams, and the acrid smell of burning thatch. Thornwick, her ancestral home, had fallen swiftly, betrayed from within. Her father, Lord Alaric, a man of unwavering strength, had been cut down defending his lands, his lifeblood staining the very stones he had sworn to protect. And she, his only heir, had been dragged from the chaos, a prize of war, a pawn in a game far grander than she could comprehend. Now, she was here, in the heart of Blackwell Keep, the stronghold of her family's ancient enemies. Before her, seated upon a raised dais, was Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the man they called the Black Lion, the architect of her family's ruin. He was younger than she'd expected, though the lines etched around his eyes and the grim set of his mouth spoke of battles fought and burdens carried. His armor, black as midnight, reflected the flickering torchlight, making him seem more shadow than man. His eyes, however, were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering over a winter sea. Juliana lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She had expected cruelty, perhaps even a gleeful gloating over his victory. Instead, she saw a weariness that mirrored her own, a profound sadness that resonated deep within her, stirring a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It was unsettling, disarming. He rose, the movement fluid and powerful, like a predator uncoiling. He descended the steps, his spurs ringing softly on the stone floor. Each step brought him closer, and Juliana fought the instinctive urge to shrink back. She was a lady of Thornwick, and even in captivity, she would not show weakness. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of leather and steel, a scent that would forever be entwined with this moment, with the loss of everything she held dear. He towered over her, his presence overwhelming, yet there was a strange stillness about him, a control that was more terrifying than any outward display of rage. "You are my prisoner, my lady," he murmured, his voice low and resonant, the sound vibrating through the stillness of the chamber. His words were a statement of fact, devoid of any inflection that might betray his thoughts. "But tell me, why do you not look at me with fear?" The question caught her off guard. It was not the taunt she had anticipated, not the triumphant declaration of a conqueror. It was curious, and that curiosity, more than anything, made her wary. "Fear is a luxury I cannot afford, Sir Knight," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father taught me that fear clouds judgment, and I must keep my wits about me if I am to survive this ordeal." A flicker of something surprise, perhaps even admiration, crossed his face. It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense, probing, as if searching for some hidden truth. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackling of the torches and the distant sounds of the castle coming to life. "Survival is a worthy goal," he said finally, his voice still low. "But survival often comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it, Lady Juliana?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. What price was he talking about? Her loyalty? Her honor? Her very life? She thought of her father, lying cold in the ruins of Thornwick, of her people, scattered and leaderless. What choice did she have? "I will pay whatever price is necessary to protect what remains of my family and my people," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. even if it means enduring your hospitality, Sir Knight. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that could have been acknowledgement or mockery. Hospitality is a strong word, my lady. You are a hostage, a valuable piece in a game that has been played for generations. Your father understood that. He knew the risks. He fought for what he believed in, Juliana retorted, her anger momentarily eclipsing her fear. He fought for his home, for his people. He would not have yielded to the likes of you. A muscle tightened in his jaw, the only outward sign of his reaction to her defiance. He fought and he lost. Such is the way of war. And now, you are the consequence of his defeat. I am not a consequence, she snapped, her pride flaring. I am Juliana of Thornwick, and I will not be broken. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. Brave words, my lady. But words are wind. It is actions that define us. And your actions, for the foreseeable future, will be dictated by me. He gestured towards a guard standing silently by the door, a hulking figure clad in chainmail. Take Lady Juliana to the West Tower. See that she is comfortable, but ensure she is guarded at all times. She is not to leave her chambers without my express permission. The guard stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Juliana knew that resistance was futile. She was surrounded by enemies, trapped within the walls of their fortress. But as she followed the guard, her back straight, her head held high, she made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would find a way to regain her freedom, to avenge her father, to reclaim her birthright. And Aldrich Blackwell, the Black Lion, would learn that the spirit of Thornwick was not so easily crushed. She held onto the sliver of hope, of seeing something other than hatred in the eyes of her captor. It was a fragile hope, but it was all she had left. The West Tower awaited, and with it, an uncertain future. Chapter 2. Whispers of Treason. The West Tower room was, surprisingly, not a dungeon cell. It was circular, with thick stone walls and a single, narrow window that offered a breathtaking, if heartbreaking, view of the rolling hills surrounding Blackwell Keeplands that had once belonged to Thornwick. The room was sparsely furnished, a large, four-poster bed draped with heavy velvet curtains, a sturdy oak table and chair, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin, and a chest that likely held her meager belongings, brought from Thornwick after the siege. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, taking the edge off the ever-present chill of the stone walls. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Juliana paced the circumference of the room, her restless energy unable to find an outlet. The guard had left her a simple meal of bread, cheese, and ale, but she had no appetite. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, anxieties, and a burning desire for retribution. How had Thornwick fallen so quickly? Her father had fortified the castle, trained his men, prepared for any attack. The speed of Blackwell's victory suggested something more than brute force, it whispered of treachery. She stopped by the window, gazing out at the landscape below. The setting sun cast long shadows across the fields, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and gold. It was a beautiful sight, yet it brought her no solace. Beauty felt like a betrayal in the face of her loss. A soft knock on the door startled her. She turned, her hand instinctively going to the small dagger she had managed to conceal in her boot, a useless weapon against armed guards, but a symbol of her defiance nonetheless. "Enter," she said, her voice carefully neutral. The door opened, and a young woman entered, carrying a tray laden with steaming water and fresh linens. She was small and slender, with wide, apprehensive eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her hands in her apron. "My lady," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Alara. I have been assigned to attend to your needs." Juliana studied her, trying to gauge her trustworthiness. The girl seemed genuinely frightened, more of the castle itself than of Juliana. "You're from Blackwell?" she asked. Alara nodded, her eyes darting towards the door as if expecting someone to appear. My lady, I have served here since I was a child." "And you witnessed the attack on Thornwick?" The girl's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "I saw the smoke, my lady. Heard the fighting. We were all locked in the kitchens, praying to the saints for protection. Juliana softened her tone. She sensed no deception in the girl, only fear. There is no need to be afraid, Alara. I will not harm you. Alara seemed to relax slightly, though her nervousness remained. Thank you, my lady. I brought you water for washing. And fresh linens for the bed. That is kind of you, Juliana said. She gestured towards the table. Set it down there. As Alara busied herself with her tasks, Juliana watched her, her mind working. This girl might be a source of information, a way to learn more about what had happened, about Blackwell, about the whispers of treason that haunted her. Alara, she said, choosing her words carefully. You said you have served here, since you were a child. You must know this castle well. Aye, my lady, Alara replied, her voice still hesitant. I know most of it. And the people? Juliana pressed gently. Do you know the whispers? Alara's hand stilled, and she looked up at Juliana, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and understanding. Whispers, my lady? She asked, feigning innocence. Whispers of betrayal, Juliana said, her voice low. Whispers of how Thornwick fell so easily. Surely, such things are spoken of even within these walls. Alara looked away, her gaze fixed on the floor. I hear things, my lady, she admitted softly. But it is not my place to speak of them. Especially not to you. I understand your fear, Juliana said. But I am not your enemy, Alara. I am a victim of this treachery, just as you are a victim of this war. If you know something, anything that might help me understand what happened, I beg you to tell me. Alara hesitated, her internal struggle evident in her face. She was torn between her loyalty to Blackwell, her fear of reprisal, and perhaps a flicker of sympathy for the captive lady before her. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice barely audible. There were rumors, my lady, she whispered. Rumors of a secret agreement between Sir Aldrich and someone within Thornwick. Someone with access to the gates, someone who betrayed your father. Juliana's heart pounded in her chest. Her suspicions were confirmed. But who? Who among her father's trusted circle could have committed such a vile act? Do you know who? She asked, her voice trembling. Alara shook her head. No, my lady. The rumors were vague whispers in the dark. But they said this person was promised wealth and power in exchange for their loyalty. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a horrifying picture. Her father had been betrayed, not by an enemy without, but by an enemy within. The thought was almost unbearable. But amidst the pain and anger, a new determination began to take root. She would find the traitor. She would expose them, make them pay for their treachery. And she would use whatever means necessary to do so, even if it meant navigating the treacherous currents of Blackwell Keep, where danger lurked around every corner, and even a simple maid could hold the key to unlocking a deadly secret. She looked at Alara, a silent plea in her eyes, a fragile alliance forming in the dimly lit room. The game had begun. Chapter 3. A Knight's Burden. Aldrich Blackwell stood on the battlements, the cold night wind whipping around him, tugging at his cloak. Below, the castle was settling into a restless slumber. Torches flickered in the courtyards, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The sounds of the night, the hooting of an owl, the distant barking of a dog, the murmur of voices from the guards' barracks drifted up to him, a familiar symphony of his existence. He should have been exhausted. The siege of Thornwick had been swift, but brutal. He had led his men with the ruthless efficiency that had earned him his reputation, the Black Lion, a moniker he wore with a mixture of pride and weariness. He had achieved his objective, secured the strategically vital lands of Thornwick, and taken its lady as a hostage, a guarantee against any future rebellion. Yet, sleep eluded him. The image of Lady Juliana, standing defiantly before him in the great hall, haunted his thoughts. He had expected fear, hatred, perhaps even a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, he had seen a strength that surprised him, a resilience that resonated with something deep within his own soul. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, had held a challenge, a spark of defiance that had ignited an unexpected flicker of something he couldn't quite name. It was unsettling. He had dealt with captives before, noble lords and ladies taken in the endless skirmishes and feuds that plagued the land. He had treated them with the respect due to their rank, but always with a detached professionalism. They were pieces on a chessboard, to be moved and manipulated as the game required. But Lady Juliana was different. He found himself questioning his own actions, his own motives. The victory at Thornwick had been necessary, strategically sound. His father, Lord Edmund Blackwell, a man driven by ambition and a deep-seated hatred of the Thornwicks, had instilled in him the importance of securing their lands, of crushing their power once and for all. It was a matter of survival, of ensuring the Blackwell legacy. But the cost, he had seen the devastation in Juliana's eyes, the raw grief, and the simmering anger. He had seen the reflection of his own past losses, the echoes of battles fought and loved ones lost. He had seen a mirror of his own burden. He leaned against the cold stone, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, where the faint glow of dawn was beginning to paint the sky. He thought of his mother, Lady Eleanor, a gentle soul who had died when he was still a boy, leaving a void in his life that had never been filled. He thought of his younger brother, Thomas, who had fallen in battle years ago, a victim of a senseless feud. He thought of the oath he had sworn to his father, to protect their lands, to uphold their honor, to carry on their legacy. An oath that now felt like a chain, binding him to a path of endless conflict and bloodshed. He had justified his actions, his ruthlessness, as necessary for the greater good, for the protection of his people. But seeing Juliana, seeing the human cost of his ambition, had shaken him. It had forced him to confront the darkness that lurked within him, the darkness that threatened to consume him. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. It was Sir Gareth, his most trusted knight, his friend since childhood, a man who knew him better than anyone. Gareth was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and a calm demeanor that belied his fierce loyalty and unwavering courage. "You cannot sleep, my lord?" Gareth asked, his voice quiet in the stillness of the night. Aldrich shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Gareth nodded, understanding without the need for explanation. He had seen the toll the war had taken on Aldrich, the weight of responsibility that he carried. "The Lady Juliana, she is defiant," Gareth said, stating the obvious. "More than defiant," Aldrich replied. "She is strong, resilient. I did not expect that." "She is her father's daughter," Gareth said. Lord Alaric was a formidable opponent. It is no surprise that his daughter possesses similar qualities. "It is more than that," Aldrich said, struggling to articulate the feelings that churned within him. She reminds me of," he trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. He didn't want to admit, even to Gareth, that Juliana reminded him of his mother, of the gentleness and strength that he had lost so long ago. Gareth remained silent, waiting patiently. He knew that Aldrich needed to work through his thoughts in his own time. "The whispers, have you heard them?" Aldrich asked finally, changing the subject. Gareth nodded. "Whispers of treachery, of a betrayal within Thornwick." "It troubles me," Aldrich said. "I prefer a clean victory, one on the battlefield, not through deceit and subterfuge." "Such is the nature of war, my lord," Gareth said pragmatically. "There are always those who seek to profit from chaos, to betray their oaths for personal gain." "I know," Aldrich said, "but it leaves a bitter taste." He paused. "Find out who it was, Gareth. Find out who betrayed Lord Alaric. I want to know the truth." He needed to know, not just for strategic reasons, but for something deeper, a need to find some semblance of justice in the midst of the carnage. He glanced back to where the West Tower stood, a solitary shape against the growing light. He felt drawn to her, to the mystery she embodied and the challenge she represented. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Kiss. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Juliana remained confined to the West Tower, her movements restricted, her only company Alara, who continued to attend to her needs with a mixture of fear and hesitant kindness. Juliana learned to read the subtle cues in the girl's demeanor, the fleeting glances, the almost imperceptible nods, gleaning fragments of information about the castle, its inhabitants, and the lingering whispers of treason. She spent hours at the window, gazing out at the landscape, her mind constantly searching for a way to escape, a way to contact her remaining loyalists, a way to strike back at Blackwell. But the castle was a fortress, its defenses formidable, its guards ever vigilant. She had been summoned to dine with Sir Aldrich twice in the great hall. These were tense, formal affairs, attended by his knights and retainers, a silent audience to their carefully veiled verbal sparring. He treated her with a cold courtesy, a respect that felt more like a calculated move in a game than genuine regard. She, in turn, maintained a proud, defiant demeanor, refusing to show any sign of weakness, any hint of the fear that gnawed at her. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. She found herself studying him, observing his interactions with his men, noticing the subtle nuances of his character. He was a complex man, a warrior hardened by battle, yet capable of moments of unexpected gentleness. She saw the way he listened to his advisors, the respect he showed to his knights, the concern he displayed for the welfare of his people. It was a stark contrast to the image of the ruthless black lion she had carried in her mind. It was during the third such dinner that the serpent revealed itself. The hall was filled with the usual clatter of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the flickering light of torches casting long shadows on the tapestry-hung walls. Juliana sat at the high table, to Aldrich's left, a position of honor that felt more like a deliberate display of her captivity. She picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the constant tension, the ever-present awareness of being surrounded by enemies. A man approached the high table, bowing low before Aldrich. He was tall and slender, with a smooth, handsome face and a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wore fine clothes, richly embroidered, and a jeweled dagger hung from his belt. "My Lord Blackwell," he said, his voice smooth and melodious. "I apologize for my late arrival. I was detained by matters of some urgency." Aldrich greeted him with a nod. "Lord Renard, you are welcome. I trust your journey was uneventful?" "Indeed, my lord," Renard replied. "Though the roads are not as safe as they once were, with the unfortunate events at Thornwick." His gaze shifted to Juliana, and his smile widened, a predatory glint in his eyes. "And this must be the Lady Juliana. I have heard much about your beauty and spirit, my lady. It is a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." Juliana met his gaze, her stomach churning with a sudden, inexplicable revulsion. There was something about this man, something in his overly familiar manner, in the way his eyes lingered on her, that made her skin crawl. "Lord Renard," she replied, her voice cool and distant. "The pleasure is all yours, I assure you." He chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Such wit. It seems the rumors are true. You are indeed a worthy prize of war." Aldrich's expression hardened, and he gave Renard a warning look. "Lord Renard," he said, his voice edged with steel, "I suggest you moderate your enthusiasm. Lady Juliana is my guest, and I expect her to be treated with the respect due to her rank." Renard bowed again, his smile unwavering. "Of course, my lord. My apologies. I was merely expressing my admiration." He took a seat at the table, positioning himself directly across from Juliana. Throughout the remainder of the meal, he continued to engage her in conversation, his words flattering, his gaze suggestive. He spoke of the court, of the latest fashions, of the upcoming tournaments, trying to draw her into his web of charm. But Juliana saw through his facade. She sensed the underlying calculation, the veiled threat that lurked beneath his smooth words. And as he spoke, she began to recognize him. He had been at Thornwick a few months before the siege. He had come as an emissary from a neighboring lord, ostensibly to discuss trade agreements. She remembered her father treating him with cautious courtesy, but also with a hint of distrust. The pieces clicked into place. Bernard. The whispers Alara had shared. A secret agreement. Betrayal. This was the man. The serpent who had kissed her father's hand while plotting his downfall. Her blood ran cold. She wanted to scream, to denounce him, to expose his treachery to the entire hall. But she knew she couldn't. Not yet. She needed proof, something more than her own intuition, and the whispers of a frightened servant girl. She forced herself to remain calm, to play the role of the gracious captive, to parry his advances with veiled insults and subtle mockery. But inside, her mind was racing, plotting, planning. She would find a way to expose him, to make him pay for his crimes. As the evening drew to a close, Renard leaned towards her, his voice low and intimate. "I hope to have the pleasure of your company again soon, my lady," he murmured. "Perhaps a walk in the gardens? Or a private audience in my chambers?" Juliana smiled, a cold, brittle smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am at Lord Blackwell's disposal, my lord," she replied. "But I doubt he would grant me such liberties. After all, I am a prisoner, am I not?" His smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He knew he had been rebuffed, that she saw through his charade. But he recovered quickly, his charm returning. "A prisoner for now, my lady," he said softly. "But circumstances can change. And who knows? Perhaps one day you will find yourself in a position to repay my kindness." He rose from the table, bowing to Aldrich and then to Juliana. "Until we meet again," he said, his eyes lingering on her with a possessive gaze that made her blood run cold. He left the hall, and Juliana released the breath she had known she'd been holding. She turned back and noticed Aldrich observing her, a knowing look present in his eyes. The game had gotten more complicated. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Fallen. The discovery of Renard's presence and the strong suspicion of his involvement in Thornwick's fall ignited a new fire in Juliana. The passive acceptance of her captivity, the slow gathering of information, were no longer enough. She needed to act, to find concrete proof, to expose the traitor and reclaim her honor. But how? She was still a prisoner, confined to the West Tower, her every move watched. She needed an ally, someone within the castle who could help her, someone she could trust. Alara was a possibility, but the girl was timid, easily frightened, and her knowledge was limited. She needed someone with more influence, more access. She began to observe the castle's inhabitants more closely, watching their interactions, listening to their conversations, trying to discern their loyalties, their secrets. She attended the meals in the great hall, enduring Renard's veiled advances and Aldrich's watchful gaze, all the while searching for an opening, a weakness in the castle's defenses, both physical and political. One evening, as she was returning to her chambers after a particularly tense dinner, she noticed a small chapel tucked away in a quiet corner of the castle. The door was slightly ajar, and a soft glow of candlelight spilled out into the corridor. Drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain, she pushed the door open and entered. The chapel was small and simple, with stone walls, a vaulted ceiling, and a single stained glass window depicting a scene of a knight kneeling before a saint. The air was thick with the scent of incense and beeswax, a familiar and comforting fragrance that reminded her of her childhood, of the chapel at Thornwick, where she had spent countless hours in prayer and contemplation. A lone figure knelt before the altar, his head bowed in prayer. He was an older man, with a kind face and a gentle demeanor. He wore the simple robes of a monk, and a silver cross hung from his neck. Juliana hesitated, unsure whether to intrude. But something about the man's presence, the quiet serenity of the chapel, drew her in. She took a seat on a wooden bench near the back, her presence unnoticed by the praying monk. She sat in silence, listening to the soft murmur of his prayers, the rhythmic chanting of the ancient words. She closed her eyes, letting the peace of the chapel wash over her, offering a brief respite from the turmoil of her thoughts. After a while, the monk finished his prayers and rose from the altar. He turned, and his eyes met Juliana's. He seemed surprised to see her, but not displeased. "My lady," he said, his voice soft and gentle, "you are welcome here. This is a place of solace, of peace. May I offer you any comfort?" Juliana rose and approached him. "Thank you, Father," she said. "I was feeling lost, troubled. I needed a moment of quiet reflection." "These are troubled times, my lady," the monk said, his eyes filled with compassion. "The fall of Thornwick, it was a great tragedy. I knew your father, Lord Alaric. He was a good man, a just man." His words struck a chord within her. Here, finally, was someone who acknowledged her loss, who spoke of her father with respect. "You knew him?" she asked, her voice trembling. My lady," the monk replied. "I served as chaplain at Thornwick for many years, before coming to Blackwell Keep. I knew your family well." A spark of hope ignited within her. This monk, Father Benedict, could be the ally she needed. He had known her father, he had served at Thornwick, he might know something about the betrayal. "Father Benedict," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need your help. I believe my father was betrayed, that Thornwick fell not by force alone, but by treachery from within." Father Benedict listened intently, his expression grave. "I have heard the whispers, my lady," he said. "But whispers are not proof. Do you have any evidence?" "Not yet," Juliana admitted. "But I believe Lord Renard is involved. He was at Thornwick before the siege, and his manner, his words, they suggest he knows more than he lets on." Father Benedict nodded slowly. "Lord Renard, he is a dangerous man, my lady. A man of ambition and few scruples. I would not put it past him to be involved in such a plot." "I need to find proof," Juliana said. "I need to expose him, to avenge my father. But I am a prisoner here. I cannot do it alone." "What is it you ask of me, my lady?" Father Benedict asked, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Information," Juliana said. "Access. You know this castle, its people. You can move freely, speak to those who might know something. You can help me find the truth." Father Benedict considered her request, his brow furrowed in thought. He knew the risks involved. Helping Juliana could be seen as treason, punishable by death. But he also felt a sense of duty, a loyalty to the memory of Lord Alaric, and a deep compassion for the young woman before him. "I will help you, my lady," he said finally. "I cannot promise success, but I will do what I can. I will listen, I will observe, I will seek the truth. But you must be careful. Trust no one. Speak to no one about this, except to me. The walls have ears, and danger lurks in every shadow." Juliana felt a surge of gratitude, a renewed sense of hope. "Thank you, Father," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You are a true friend." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I am merely a servant of God, my lady," he said. "And I believe that justice must be served, even in the darkest of times." He led her back toward the door, the candlelight once again flickering, casting long shadows as it had before. But in those shadows, for the first time since her capture, hope moved and a plan formed. The echoes of her father would not fade. They would grow louder. Chapter 6. Beneath a Cloak of Stars. The nights in Blackwell Keep were long and often sleepless for Juliana. The confines of the West Tower, once a source of relative comfort, now felt increasingly like a prison. The discovery of Father Benedict as a potential ally had given her a renewed sense of purpose, but it had also heightened her awareness of the dangers surrounding her. She trusted the monk, but she knew that even his influence was limited. She needed to find a way to communicate with the outside world, to reach her loyalists who had survived the fall of Thornwick. She needed to gather more information about Renard, to find concrete proof of his treachery. One night, unable to sleep, she rose from her bed and went to the window. The moon was full, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. The stars were bright, scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. She gazed out at the familiar hills, her heart aching for home, for freedom. As she watched, she noticed a flicker of movement in the courtyard below. A figure, cloaked and hooded, was moving stealthily across the open space, heading towards a small, secluded garden that lay just beyond the castle walls. Intrigued, Juliana watched the figure disappear into the shadows of the garden. She wondered who it was, and what their purpose might be. Could it be someone loyal to her, attempting to make contact? Or was it something more sinister? She decided to take a risk. She dressed quickly, wrapping a dark cloak around her shoulders. She had discovered a small, rarely used staircase that led from the west tower down to a side entrance of the castle. It was a risky venture, but the potential reward, the possibility of finding a way to escape, or at least to communicate with the outside world, was too great to ignore. She slipped out of her room, her heart pounding in her chest. The corridors were dark and silent, the only sound her own soft footsteps on the stone floor. She reached the staircase and began to descend, her hand gripping the cold, rough stone of the wall. She reached the bottom of the stairs and cautiously opened the door. It led to a narrow passage that ran along the outer wall of the castle. She followed the passage, her senses on high alert, until she reached a small, wooden gate that led to the garden. The gate was unlocked. She slipped through, her cloak blending into the shadows. The garden was small and overgrown, with a neglected air. The scent of herbs and flowers mingled with the damp earth, a strangely peaceful oasis within the grim walls of the castle. She saw the figure again, standing near a stone fountain in the center of the garden. It was a woman, her face hidden by the hood of her cloak. As Juliana approached, the woman turned, and her eyes met Juliana's. It was Alara. Juliana was surprised, but also relieved. She had sensed a certain loyalty in the young servant girl, a hidden sympathy that went beyond her fear. "Alara?" she whispered. "What are you doing here?" Alara looked around nervously, her eyes darting towards the castle walls. "My lady," she whispered back. I had to see you. I have something to tell you." "What is it?" Juliana asked, her heart quickening with anticipation. Alara took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her apron. "I overheard a conversation," she said, "between Lord Renard and another man. They were talking about you, about Thornwick." Juliana's grip tightened on her cloak. "What did they say?" "They were talking about a letter," Alara said. "A letter that proves Lord Renard's involvement in the betrayal of your father. They said it was hidden somewhere in his chambers." A letter. Concrete proof. This was what Juliana had been waiting for. "Do you know where in his chambers?" she asked. Alara shook her head. "No, my lady. But I know someone who might. One of the other servants, she cleans Lord Renard's rooms. She might know where he keeps his secrets. Can you trust her?" Juliana asked. Alara hesitated. "I think so. She does not like Lord Renard. She says he is cruel. And she pities you, my lady." Juliana nodded. "We must be careful," she said. "If Renard discovers our plans, I know, my lady," Alara said. "But I will do what I can. I will speak to the other servant tomorrow. And I will find a way to get you a message." Juliana placed a hand on Alara's arm, her gratitude overwhelming. "Thank you, Alara," she said. "You are risking much for me." Alara looked down, her cheeks flushed. I believe in you, my lady," she said softly. "I believe you are good. And I want to help you." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle splashing of the fountain. The moon shone down on them, bathing them in its silvery light, forging a bond between the captive lady and the frightened servant girl, a bond of trust and shared purpose beneath a cloak of stars. Juliana knew this was a turning point, a fragile alliance formed. She and Alara were playing a very dangerous game. Chapter 7. The Price of Honor. Aldrich found himself increasingly drawn to the West Tower. It wasn't just the strategic importance of keeping Lady Juliana under close watch, it was something more, a pull he couldn't explain, a fascination that bordered on obsession. He told himself it was merely the challenge she presented, the defiance in her eyes, the unwavering spirit that refused to be broken. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He had started taking his evening meals in his private chambers, a small, sparsely furnished room adjacent to the Great Hall. From there, he could observe the comings and goings of the castle, and he often found his gaze drifting towards the West Tower, silhouetted against the twilight sky. He knew about Renard's interest in Juliana. He had seen the way the man looked at her, the possessive gleam in his eyes, the thinly veiled threats that lurked beneath his charming facade. It angered him, more than he cared to admit. He had warned Renard to keep his distance, but he knew the man was not to be trusted. He also knew about the whispers of treason, the rumors that Renard had been involved in the fall of Thornwick. He had tasked Gareth with investigating the matter, but so far they had found no concrete proof. One evening, as he was standing by the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape, he saw a flicker of movement in the courtyard below. He recognized the figure Lady Juliana, cloaked and hooded, slipping out of a side entrance and heading towards the secluded garden. His first instinct was to order his guards to intercept her, to bring her back to her chambers. But something held him back. Curiosity, perhaps, or a grudging respect for her courage. He decided to follow her, to see what she was up to. He donned a dark cloak, concealing his armor, and slipped out of his chambers, following the same path Juliana had taken. He moved silently, his years of experience as a warrior making him almost invisible in the shadows. He reached the garden and saw Juliana talking to Alara, the young servant girl. He concealed himself behind a thick hedge, close enough to hear their conversation. He heard Alara speak of a letter that proved Renard's treachery. He heard Juliana's questions, her determination to find the proof, to expose the traitor. His heart pounded in his chest. This was a dangerous game they were playing, a game that could have deadly consequences. He should stop them, arrest them both, put an end to this foolishness. But he didn't. He found himself admiring Juliana's bravery, her unwavering loyalty to her father, her refusal to give up hope. He also felt a surge of protectiveness towards her, a desire to shield her from the dangers that surrounded her. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a feeling he thought he had buried long ago. He listened as Alara promised to help Juliana, to find the other servant who might know the location of the letter. He listened as Juliana thanked Alara, her voice filled with gratitude. He watched as they parted, Juliana returning to the castle, Alara disappearing into the shadows. He remained hidden, his mind racing, his emotions in turmoil. He knew he couldn't allow Juliana to continue her investigation. It was too dangerous. Renard was a powerful and ruthless man, and he would not hesitate to silence anyone who threatened him. But he also couldn't bring himself to betray her, to hand her over to Renard, to crush her spirit. He had to find another way, a way to protect her, to expose Renard, to uphold his own honor. The price of that honor, though, was becoming greater and greater. He had let his father's vendetta take him to the brink. Now it was time to pull back from that edge. The honor he fought for, he thought, would be hollow if this woman, this captive, was injured as part of his long-running family feud. He stepped out of the shadows and returned to his chambers, his mind made up. He would confront Renard. He would demand the truth. And he would protect Juliana, even if it meant risking his own life. He had to be careful, though. Renard was a snake, and a snake always struck when least expected. The burden was Aldrich's now, and his alone. Chapter 8. Scars of the Past. The next day dawned gray and overcast, mirroring Juliana's apprehension. Alara had promised to seek out the other servant, the one who cleaned Renard's chambers, and try to discover the location of the incriminating letter. Juliana spent the morning pacing her room, her nerves on edge, her mind replaying every detail of her conversation with Alara, every nuance of Renard's behavior. She had received a summons from Aldrich, requesting her presence in his private chambers after the midday meal. She had no idea what he wanted, but the unexpectedness of the request filled her with unease. Was it about her meeting with Alara? Had he discovered their plans? She dressed carefully, choosing a simple gown of dark blue, her only adornment a silver locket that had belonged to her mother. The locket contained a miniature portrait of her parents, a reminder of happier times, of the love and security she had lost. She clasped it around her neck, drawing strength from the memory of her family. As she made her way to Aldrich's chambers, she saw Father Benedict in the corridor. He gave her a subtle nod, a silent reassurance that he was continuing his own investigation, his own search for the truth. She reached Aldrich's chambers and knocked on the door. A guard opened it, and she entered. The room was small and sparsely furnished, but it had a warmth that the great hall lacked. A fire burned in the hearth, and a large window offered a view of the castle courtyard. Aldrich was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. He was not wearing his armor, but a simple tunic of dark gray, which made him seem less imposing, more human. "Lady Juliana," he said, his voice neutral. "Thank you for coming. You summoned me, Sir Knight." she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. What is it you wish to discuss? He gestured towards a chair near the fire. Please sit. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on him. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes studying her intently. I believe you are engaged in a dangerous undertaking, my lady, he said finally, his voice low. Juliana's heart skipped a beat. He knew. I do not know what you mean, Sir Knight, she said, feigning ignorance. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. Do not insult my intelligence, Lady Juliana. I know about your meeting with Alara. I know about the letter. She remained silent, her mind racing. How much did he know? Had Alara betrayed her? Alara did not betray you, he said, as if reading her thoughts. I followed you last night. I overheard your conversation. She met his gaze, her defiance returning. And what do you intend to do about it? That depends, he said. On you. On what you hope to achieve. I seek justice, she said, her voice firm. I seek to expose the traitor who betrayed my father, who brought ruin upon my family. And you believe Renard is that traitor?
I do, she said.
And I believe the letter will prove it. He nodded slowly. I have heard the whispers too, he said. But whispers are not proof. And Renard is a powerful man, with allies in high places. Accusing him without evidence could be disastrous. I am aware of the risks, she said. But I am not afraid. I will not rest until I have avenged my father's death. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense, probing. She saw something in his eyes then, something that went beyond the cold calculation of a warrior, beyond the detached courtesy he had shown her before. She saw a flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration. I understand your desire for vengeance, he said, his voice softer now. I, too, have lost loved ones. I, too, have known the pain of betrayal. He turned away from her, his gaze fixed on the fire. He spoke of his mother, of his brother, of the losses that had scarred him, of the burden of responsibility he carried. He spoke of the oath he had sworn to his father, to protect his lands, to uphold his honor. As he spoke, Juliana saw a different side of Aldrich Blackwell, a side that was vulnerable, human, haunted by the past. She saw the scars he carried, the wounds that had never fully healed. And she realized that they were not so different after all. They were both driven by loyalty, by a desire to protect what they held dear, by a need to find justice in a world filled with injustice. The silence that followed was charged. She could tell that she was witnessing something rare, a revelation, a glimpse behind the mask that he wore, both for the world, and it seemed at times, for himself. The shared scars of the past, those of loss and duty, had for a moment bridged the gulf between captive and captor. The fire crackled, the sound a stark reminder of the ever-present tension, but for a short time, the air had seemed to clear, at least between them. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deception. The uneasy truce, the shared moment of vulnerability between Juliana and Aldrich, did not diminish the danger. If anything, it heightened the stakes. Juliana knew that Aldrich's personal feelings, whatever they might be, would not outweigh his duty to his family, his loyalty to his own people. And she knew that Renard was still a threat, a serpent lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Alara delivered news the following day. She had spoken to the other servant, a woman named Mara, who confirmed that Renard kept a locked chest in his chambers, where he stored his most important documents. Mara had agreed to help, but she was terrified of Renard, and she insisted on absolute secrecy. Juliana, Alara, and Father Benedict met in the small chapel, their clandestine gatherings becoming a regular occurrence. They devised a plan, a risky and complicated scheme that relied on stealth, deception, and a great deal of luck. Mara would attempt to steal the key to Renard's chest during her cleaning duties. Alara would then create a distraction, drawing Renard away from his chambers long enough for Juliana to enter, search the chest, and retrieve the letter, if it was indeed there. Father Benedict would stand watch, using his position as a trusted member of the castle to deflect any suspicion. The plan was fraught with peril. If they were caught, the consequences would be severe. But Juliana was determined to proceed. She had come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. A hunting party was organized, a grand affair involving many of the castle's knights and nobles, including Renard. Aldrich, however, chose to remain at the castle, citing the need to oversee its defenses. This was both a blessing and a curse for Juliana. It meant that Renard would be away, but it also meant that Aldrich, with his unsettling ability to see through her deceptions, would be present. The day of the hunt dawned bright and clear. Juliana watched from the window of the West Tower as the hunting party rode out, a colorful procession of horses, hounds, and riders. Renard, dressed in elaborate hunting attire, cast a lingering glance at the tower before he departed, a smug smile on his face. Juliana felt a surge of anger, a renewed determination to bring him down. As soon as the hunting party was out of sight, the plan was set in motion. Mara, her hands trembling, managed to steal the key to Renard's chest and slipped it to Alara. Alara, in turn, feigned a sudden illness, creating a commotion in the kitchens that drew the attention of several servants, including those who served Renard. Juliana, her heart pounding in her chest, slipped out of the West Tower and made her way to Renard's chambers. Father Benedict, standing near the entrance to the corridor, gave her a subtle nod, his presence a silent reassurance. She reached Renard's chambers and cautiously opened the door. The room was lavishly decorated, with rich tapestries, ornate furniture, and a large, four-poster bed. The chest was located near the window, a heavy, iron-bound box that looked impenetrable. She inserted the key into the lock, her hands shaking. The lock clicked open. She lifted the lid, her breath catching in her throat. The chest was filled with documents, scrolls, and letters, all neatly arranged. She began to search, her fingers sifting through the papers, her eyes scanning the contents. She found several letters that mentioned Thornwick, but nothing that explicitly implicated Renard in the betrayal. She was about to give up hope when she saw a small, sealed packet tucked away in a corner of the chest. She pulled it out, her heart racing. The seal was broken, and the letter inside was written in a familiar hand. It was a letter from Lord Renard to one of her father's most trusted advisors, Sir Kellington, the traitor. The letter detailed the plan to betray Thornwick, to open the gates to Blackwell's forces in exchange for wealth and power. It was signed by Renard, and it contained a detailed account of the payments he had made to Kellington. She had it, the proof. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it inside her gown. She closed the chest, locked it, and replaced the key. She slipped out of Renard's chambers, her heart soaring with triumph. As she made her way back to the West Tower, she saw Aldrich standing in the corridor, his arms crossed, his expression grim. He had been waiting for her. The dance was not over, it had just begun. He knew, somehow, without a word passing between them. The carefully constructed walls were crumbling. Chapter 10. The Falcon's Flight. Where have you been, Lady Juliana? Aldrich's voice was low, controlled, but the underlying tension was unmistakable. Juliana met his gaze, her heart pounding. She knew she couldn't lie to him, not now. He had seen her. He knew she had been in Renard's chambers. I was seeking answers, Sir Knight, she replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Answers to questions that have haunted me since the fall of Thornwick. And did you find those answers? He asked, his eyes searching hers. She hesitated, then nodded. I did. And what do you intend to do with them? She took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. She had to trust him, at least partially. She had to gamble that his sense of honor, his own doubts about Renard, would outweigh his loyalty to his own kind. I intend to expose the traitor who betrayed my father, she said, her voice firm. I intend to bring him to justice. And you believe you have the proof to do so? She reached inside her gown and pulled out the letter. She held it out to him, her hand trembling slightly. This letter, it proves Lord Renard's involvement in the betrayal of Thornwick. It is signed by him, and it details the agreement he made with Sir Kellington. Aldrich took the letter, his expression unreadable. He unfolded it and began to read, his eyes scanning the contents. Juliana watched him, her breath held captive in her chest, waiting for his reaction. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire in the nearby hearth. Aldrich's face remained impassive, but she saw a muscle tighten in his jaw, a flicker of anger in his eyes. Finally, he finished reading and looked up at her. "This is damning evidence, my lady," he said, his voice low. "If this letter is genuine, it is genuine," Juliana said. "I swear it on my father's memory." He nodded slowly. "I believe you. I have had my own suspicions about Renard, but I lacked proof. This changes everything. What will you do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I will uphold the law," he said. "I will bring Renard to justice. But it will not be easy. He has powerful allies, and he will not go down without a fight." "I am prepared to fight," Juliana said. "I will testify against him. I will tell the truth about what happened at Thornwick." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You are a brave woman, Lady Juliana," he said. "Brave and foolish. This is a dangerous game you are playing." "I have nothing left to lose," she said, "except my honor. And I will not surrender that to a traitor." He reached out and touched her arm, a brief, gentle gesture that sent a shiver through her. "Be careful, my lady," he said. "Trust no one, except perhaps me." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the barriers between them seemed to dissolve. They were no longer captive and captor, but two individuals bound by a shared purpose, a shared desire for justice. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the corridor, the letter clutched in her hand. She felt a surge of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. But she also knew that the battle was far from over. She returned to her chambers and waited. She knew that Aldrich would act, but she didn't know when or how. She had to be ready for anything. Later that evening, as she was gazing out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, she saw a falcon soaring high above the castle. It was a magnificent bird, its wings outstretched, its flight effortless and graceful. She watched it as it circled the castle, then flew away, disappearing into the distance. She felt a strange connection to the bird, a sense of freedom, of hope. It was a sign, she believed, a sign that she, too, would one day be free, that she, too, would soar above the walls that imprisoned her. The falcon's flight was her promise. She would see this through. Chapter 11. Within walls of stone. The castle was strangely quiet. The hunting party had not yet returned, and Aldrich had confined Renard to his chambers, pending a formal inquiry into the accusations leveled against him. Juliana remained in the West Tower, ostensibly still a captive, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guards were still present, but they seemed less vigilant, their gazes less hostile. She had not seen Aldrich since their encounter in the corridor, but she knew he was working behind the scenes, gathering evidence, preparing for the confrontation with Renard. Father Benedict had informed her that Aldrich had summoned several of his most trusted knights, men known for their loyalty and integrity, to serve as witnesses and advisors. The waiting was agonizing. Juliana paced her room, her mind replaying every detail of her plan, every possible outcome. She knew that Renard would deny the accusations, that he would use his charm and his influence to try to sway the council in his favor. She had to be prepared to counter his lies, to present her case with unwavering conviction. Late in the afternoon, she was summoned to the Great Hall. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of dark green, a color that symbolized hope and resilience. She wore the silver locket, her mother's portrait a constant reminder of the strength she carried within. As she entered the Great Hall, she saw that it had been transformed. The long table had been removed, and chairs had been arranged in a semicircle facing a raised dais. Aldrich was seated on the dais, flanked by his knights. Renard was seated to one side, his face pale, his expression defiant. The hall was filled with onlookers, castle servants, guards, and other members of the household, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. Juliana was led to a chair facing the dais, directly opposite Renard. Their eyes met, and she saw a flicker of fear in his gaze, a momentary crack in his carefully constructed facade. Aldrich began the proceedings, his voice calm and authoritative. He outlined the accusations against Renard, citing the letter as evidence of his treachery. He then called upon Juliana to testify. Juliana rose and faced the council. She spoke clearly and concisely, recounting the events that had led to the fall of Thornwick, her father's death, and her own captivity. She described her discovery of the letter, her suspicions about Renard, her unwavering belief in his guilt. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but as she spoke, she gained confidence, her passion fueling her words. She looked directly at Renard as she spoke, her gaze unwavering, her eyes filled with righteous anger. When she finished, Renard was given the opportunity to respond. He rose, his charming smile firmly in place, his voice smooth and persuasive. He denied all the accusations, claiming that the letter was a forgery, a clever fabrication designed to discredit him. He portrayed himself as a loyal servant of Blackwell, a victim of Juliana's desperate attempt to avenge her father's defeat. He spoke eloquently, weaving a web of lies and half-truths, playing on the council's doubts, exploiting their prejudices. He even managed to cast suspicion on Juliana, suggesting that she had been manipulated by others, that she was seeking to sow discord within the castle. Juliana listened, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She knew she had to counter his lies, to expose his deception. When it was her turn to speak again, she addressed the council directly, her voice filled with passion and conviction. She challenged Renard's claims, pointing out the inconsistencies in his testimony, the flaws in his logic. She appealed to the council's sense of honor, their sense of justice, their loyalty to the truth. The debate went back and forth, a tense and dramatic exchange that held the entire hall captive. Aldrich remained silent throughout, observing the proceedings, his expression inscrutable. Finally, Aldrich called upon Father Benedict to testify. The monk, his face grave, confirmed that he had heard the whispers of treachery, that he had seen Renard meeting secretly with Sir Kellington in the days before the siege. He also testified that he had witnessed Juliana's distress, her unwavering belief in her father's innocence, her determination to find the truth. Benedict's testimony was a turning point. His reputation for honesty and integrity was unimpeachable, and his words carried significant weight. Aldrich then addressed the council, his voice grave. "We have heard the accusations, the denials, the testimony of witnesses," he said. "We have seen the evidence, the letter that implicates Lord Renard in the betrayal of Thornwick. It is now our duty to render a judgment." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the knights. "I have known Lord Renard for many years," he said. "I have trusted him, valued his counsel. But I cannot ignore the evidence before me. I cannot condone treachery, betrayal, the violation of sacred oaths." He turned to Renard, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Lord Renard," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "I find you guilty of treason against Lord Alaric of Thornwick and against the laws of this land." A collective gasp arose from those gathered. Murmurs rippled and echoed within the walls of stone. The verdict hung heavy in the air. Chapter 12. A Glimmer of Hope. The pronouncement of Renard's guilt sent shockwaves through the castle. The murmurs that had followed Aldrich's words quickly escalated into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and exclamations. Renard, his face ashen, his carefully constructed facade shattered, remained seated, his eyes darting around the hall as if seeking an escape. But there was none. Aldrich's knights, their faces grim, moved to surround Renard, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. He was taken into custody, stripped of his rank and his possessions, and led away to the castle dungeons to await his punishment. Juliana remained seated, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had achieved her goal. The traitor had been exposed, justice had been served. But the victory felt bittersweet. It could not bring back her father. It could not restore her home. It could not erase the pain of her loss. Aldrich descended from the dais and approached her. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions: relief, admiration, and something else, something deeper, that she couldn't quite decipher. "You have done well, Lady Juliana," he said, his voice low. "You have proven your courage, your integrity, your unwavering loyalty to your father." "Thank you, Sir Knight," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "For upholding the law, for seeking the truth." He nodded slowly. "Justice must be served," he said, "even when it is difficult, even when it comes at a personal cost." He paused, then added, his voice softer now, "What will you do now, my lady? Now that Renard is gone?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. She was still technically his captive, a hostage, a pawn in the ongoing conflict between their families. But the circumstances had changed. She had proven her innocence, exposed a traitor, and earned Aldrich's respect, perhaps even his something more. "I do not know," she said honestly. "My home is gone, my people scattered. I have nowhere to go." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "You could stay here," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "At Blackwell Keep. Not as a captive, but as a guest." The offer surprised her. It was unexpected, unprecedented. It was also tempting. She had found a measure of safety within these walls, a strange sense of belonging, despite the circumstances of her arrival. And she had found something else, something she was only beginning to understand, in her interactions with Aldrich. But she hesitated. Could she truly trust him? Could she ever forget that he was the son of her family's enemy, the man who had led the attack on Thornwick? Could she ever overcome the barriers of history, of blood, of loyalty? I need time to think," she said, her voice uncertain. He nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need, my lady," he said. "But know that you are welcome here. You have earned a place within these walls, if you choose to accept it." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the great hall, the echoes of the trial still ringing in her ears. She felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of a future she had not dared to imagine. But she also knew that the path ahead was uncertain, that the wounds of the past were still raw, that the challenges were far from over. She returned to the West Tower, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She was no longer a prisoner in the same way, yet she was not truly free. She was caught between two worlds, between her past and her future, between her loyalty to her family and the unexpected connection she had forged with her captor. As she gazed out the window at the twilight sky, she saw a single star shining brightly above the horizon. It was a symbol of hope, of guidance, of a path yet to be revealed. She made a silent vow, a promise to herself, to her father, to the future she was only beginning to glimpse. She would find her way, she would rebuild her life, she would forge a new destiny, even within these walls of stone. There was a glimmer of hope, and she held on to that tightly. The star seemed to wink at her, a silent acknowledgement. Chapter 13. The Heart's Citadel. The days following Renard's condemnation were filled with a strange, uneasy calm. The castle buzzed with whispers and speculation, but the tension that had gripped it for so long had dissipated. Juliana found herself in a peculiar position. She was no longer treated as a captive, but she was not entirely free. She was a guest, as Aldrich had offered, but a guest with an uncertain future. She spent much of her time alone, in the West Tower, contemplating her options, wrestling with her conflicting emotions. She thought of returning to Thornwick, of attempting to rebuild her home, to rally her scattered people. But she knew that the task was daunting, perhaps impossible, without support, without resources. She also thought of Aldrich. She could not deny the connection she felt with him, the unexpected respect and understanding that had grown between them. She had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the armor, the warrior burdened by duty, scarred by loss, capable of compassion and justice. But she also remembered that he was a Blackwell, the son of her family's enemy. She remembered the siege of Thornwick, the death of her father, the destruction of her home. Could she ever truly trust him? Could she ever overcome the legacy of hatred and conflict that separated their families? She sought solace in the small chapel, her conversations with Father Benedict providing a measure of comfort and guidance. The monk listened patiently to her doubts, her fears, her hopes, offering words of wisdom and encouragement. "The heart, my lady, is a complex citadel," he said one evening as they sat together in the Camelot chapel. "It is fortified by walls of loyalty, of duty, of memory. But it also has gates that can be opened to compassion, to understanding, to love. But can those gates ever truly be open to an enemy?" Juliana asked, her voice troubled. "An enemy is merely someone we do not yet understand," Father Benedict replied. "Someone whose heart we have not yet seen. And sometimes, my lady, it is through our enemies that we discover our own strengths, our own capacity for forgiveness, for healing." His words resonated with her, echoing the feelings that had been stirring within her own heart. She had seen Aldrich's heart, at least a glimpse of it, and she had found it to be not so different from her own. One afternoon, she received a summons from Aldrich. He requested her presence in the castle gardens, the same secluded garden where she had met with Alara that fateful night. She found him there, standing by the stone fountain, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. He turned as she approached, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Lady Juliana," he said, his voice gentle, "I hope you are finding some measure of peace within these walls." "I am grateful for your hospitality, Sir Knight," she replied, her voice still hesitant. "Hospitality is not the word I would use," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I offered you a place here, not as a captive, but as someone who has earned my respect, my friendship." She met his gaze, her heart beating faster. "And I have come to value that friendship, Sir Knight," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. "I know the past cannot be undone," he said. "The wounds of war run deep. But I believe that we can forge a new path, a path of peace, of understanding, perhaps even of reconciliation." He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. A shiver ran through her, a mixture of fear and excitement. "I know it is a risk," he said, his voice low and intense. "For both of us. But I am willing to take that risk. Are you, my lady?" She looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth there, the sincerity, the vulnerability. She saw the man beneath the armor, the man who had captured her heart, despite all the barriers, all the obstacles. And she could resist no more, the truth and emotion laid bare, raw. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." The citadel had opened. Chapter 14. Shadows of Doubt. The decision to accept Aldrich's offer, to embrace the possibility of a future at Blackwell Keep, brought a sense of peace to Juliana, but it was a fragile peace, easily disturbed by the shadows of doubt that still lingered in her mind. The reactions of the castle inhabitants were mixed. Some welcomed her, seeing her as a symbol of reconciliation, a bridge between two warring families. Others viewed her with suspicion, with resentment, with open hostility. She was, after all, a Thornwick, and the memory of the conflict, the loss of life on both sides, was still fresh. Alara was overjoyed, her loyalty to Juliana unwavering. Father Benedict offered his quiet support, his blessings on their burgeoning relationship. But others were less accepting. Sir Gareth, Aldrich's most trusted knight, remained wary. He had witnessed Aldrich's growing affection for Juliana, and he was concerned. He respected Juliana's courage and integrity, but he feared that her presence could weaken Aldrich, could distract him from his duties, could make him vulnerable to his enemies. "My lord," Gareth said to Aldrich one evening, as they stood on the battlements, overlooking the castle, "I understand your feelings for the Lady Juliana. But you must be careful. She is still a Thornwick, and there are those who would use her to undermine you, to weaken our defenses." Aldrich sighed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I know, Gareth," he said. "I am aware of the risks. But I believe that this is the right path. I believe that we can forge a new future, a future of peace, not war. And what of your father's oath? Gareth asked. The oath you swore to protect our lands, to avenge our losses? Aldrich's expression hardened.
My father is gone, he said.
And his oath died with him. I will forge my own oath, an oath to protect my people, to uphold justice, to build a better future, not to perpetuate the hatreds of the past. Gareth remained silent, his doubts unspoken. He loved Aldrich like a brother, and he would follow him to the ends of the earth. But he could not shake his unease, his fear that this newfound love could lead to disaster. Juliana, too, faced opposition. Some of the castle servants whispered behind her back, calling her a traitor, a spy, a whore. Some of the noble ladies refused to acknowledge her, treating her with open disdain. She endured these slights with stoic dignity, refusing to be drawn into their petty conflicts. She focused on building relationships with those who were open to her, on proving her loyalty, her integrity, her commitment to a peaceful future. But the shadows of doubt persisted. She overheard conversations, caught fleeting glances, sensed the underlying tension that simmered beneath the surface of castle life. She knew that there were those who would never accept her, who would always see her as an enemy. One evening, as she was walking in the gardens, she encountered Lady Isolde, a cousin of Aldrich's, a woman known for her sharp tongue and her fierce loyalty to the Blackwell family. So, the Lady Juliana, Isolde said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Enjoying your stay at Blackwell Keep? Juliana met her gaze, her head held high. I am grateful for Lord Aldrich's hospitality, she replied, her voice calm and measured. Isolde laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Hospitality? Is that what you call it? You are a prisoner here, my lady, a trophy of war. Do not delude yourself into thinking you are anything more. Juliana's temper flared, but she forced herself to remain calm. I am not a prisoner, Lady Isolde, she said. I am here by choice. And I believe that Lord Aldrich and I can forge a new path, a path of peace between our families. Isolde scoffed. Peace? You speak of peace while your people still mourn their dead, while the wounds of war are still fresh. You are a fool, my lady, and you will bring ruin upon us all. She turned and walked away, leaving Juliana standing alone in the garden, her heart filled with a renewed sense of unease. Isolde's words, though cruel, echoed the doubts that still haunted her, the fears that she could never truly escape her past, that she could never truly bridge the gap between two warring families. The shadows were deep, and she began to wonder if the light she sought was only a mirage. Chapter 15. The Unspoken Vow. Despite the undercurrent of doubt and suspicion, Juliana and Aldrich's relationship deepened. They spent hours together, walking in the gardens, talking in his private chambers, sharing meals in the great hall, their presence together a silent statement, a defiance of the prejudices and expectations that surrounded them. They spoke of their pasts, their losses, their hopes for the future. Juliana learned more about Aldrich's childhood, his relationship with his father, the burden of responsibility he had carried since a young age. Aldrich learned more about Juliana's upbringing, her love for her family, her dreams for Thornwick. They discovered shared passions, a love for horses, for music, for the beauty of the natural world. They found solace in each other's company, a refuge from the pressures and anxieties of castle life. But they also avoided certain topics, certain unspoken truths that hung between them like a fragile veil. They did not speak of marriage, of a formal union between their families. They did not speak of the future of Thornwick, of the possibility of Juliana reclaiming her birthright. They did not speak of the opposition they faced, the whispers and the doubts that threatened to undermine their fragile bond. One evening, as they were sitting together by the fire in Aldrich's chambers, Juliana decided to break the silence. Aldrich, she said, her voice hesitant, we have not spoken of the future, of what this means for us, for our families. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and apprehension. I know, he said. It is complicated. Complicated, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. And dangerous. There are those who would never accept a union between us. I am aware of that, he said. But I do not care. I will not let the prejudices of others dictate my life, my feelings. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Juliana, he said, his voice low and intense. I care for you deeply. More than I ever thought possible. More than I have ever cared for anyone. Her heart soared at his words, but a shadow of doubt still lingered. And I care for you, Aldrich, she said. But can we truly overcome the past? Can we truly bridge the gap between our families? He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. We can try, he said. We must try. For ourselves, for our people, for the future we both desire. He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. I may not be able to offer you a crown, my lady, he said, or a kingdom, but I can offer you my heart, my loyalty, my unwavering devotion. Will that be enough? She looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth there, the sincerity, the love that shone through the darkness of their past. And she knew that it was enough. It had to be. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she whispered. It is enough. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that sealed their unspoken vow, their commitment to each other, their defiance of the obstacles that stood in their way. It was a kiss that spoke of hope, of healing, of a future they would build together, a future forged in love, not war. It was a kiss that, for the moment, silenced the doubts, the fears, the whispers. It was a kiss that promised a new beginning, a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that would be written not in blood, but in the ink of their shared hearts. The unspoken vow was made, sealed with a kiss, under the watchful eyes of a past they were determined to overcome. Chapter 16. A Web of Lies. The tentative peace, the burgeoning love between Juliana and Aldrich, was shattered by a new threat, a revelation that struck at the very heart of their fragile bond. A messenger arrived from a neighboring lord, bearing a sealed letter addressed to Aldrich. The messenger was ushered into the great hall, where Aldrich, Juliana, Gareth, and several other knights were gathered. Aldrich broke the seal and read the letter, his expression growing increasingly grim. He finished reading, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "What is it, my lord?" Gareth asked, his voice filled with concern. Aldrich looked up, his gaze meeting Juliana's. There was a mixture of anger, confusion, and betrayal in his eyes. "This letter," he said, his voice low and strained. "It accuses Lady Juliana of treachery." Juliana's heart stopped. She felt a cold dread wash over her, a sense of disbelief and horror. "Treachery?" she whispered. What do you mean?" Aldrich held out the letter. "This letter claims that you have been in communication with enemies of Blackwell," he said. "That you have been plotting to overthrow me, to reclaim Thornwick by force." Juliana took the letter, her hands shaking. She read the contents, her eyes widening in disbelief. The letter was written in a style that mimicked her own, and it contained details of her life at Thornwick, details that only someone who knew her well could have known. It was addressed to a lord known to be hostile to Blackwell, and it outlined a plan to incite rebellion, to attack the castle, to restore Juliana to her former position. This is a lie," she said, her voice trembling. "I have never written this letter. I have never plotted against you. I swear it on my father's memory." Aldrich looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He wanted to believe her. He desperately wanted to believe her. But the evidence, the letter, it was damning. Who could have written this? Gareth asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Who would benefit from such a deception? Aldrich's gaze shifted to the messenger. "Who gave you this letter?" he demanded. The messenger hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the hall. I was given it by a woman," he said. She paid me to deliver it. She said it was of utmost importance." "A woman?" Aldrich asked. "Can you describe her?" The messenger described a woman of medium height, with dark hair and striking features. He could not, however, recall any other details, claiming the woman had kept her face partially concealed by a hood. Juliana listened, her mind racing. The description, it could fit any number of women in the castle. But a suspicion, a terrible, sickening suspicion, began to form in her mind. "Isolde," she said, her voice barely a whisper. All eyes turned to her. "Lady Isolde?" Aldrich asked, his voice incredulous. "Why would she do such a thing?" She hates me," Juliana said. "She has made no secret of her disdain for me, her belief that I am a threat to Blackwell. She wants me gone." Gareth stepped forward. "This is a serious accusation, my lady," he said. "Do you have any proof?" Juliana shook her head.
"No, not yet."
"But I know it is her. I can feel it." Aldrich looked from Juliana to the messenger, his mind struggling to make sense of the situation. He trusted Juliana, he loved her. But the evidence, the letter, it was difficult to ignore. He and Gareth had known of Isolde's dislike for Juliana, but they had never believed it would go so far. It seemed they were wrong. "We will investigate this matter thoroughly," he said finally, his voice firm. "We will find the truth. And if Lady Isolde is indeed responsible for this treachery, she will be punished." He paused, then added, his gaze meeting Juliana's, "And if this letter is proven to be false, then whoever did forge it will face the harshest punishment. I swear this." The web of lies had been cast, and now it threatened to ensnare them all. Chapter 17. The Dawn of Reckoning. The accusation of treachery hung over Juliana like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over her relationship with Aldrich and threatening to unravel the fragile peace that had been established within Blackwell Keep. Despite Aldrich's vow to investigate the matter thoroughly, a seed of doubt had been planted, and the atmosphere within the castle grew tense and suspicious. Juliana was confined to her chambers, ostensibly for her own protection, but she felt like a prisoner once again. She was allowed to see only Alara and Father Benedict, both of whom remained steadfast in their loyalty and belief in her innocence. Aldrich, torn between his love for Juliana and his duty to his people, launched a discreet investigation, questioning the messenger further, searching for any clue that might lead to the true author of the letter. He also questioned Isolde, who vehemently denied the accusations, claiming that she was being framed by Juliana. The confrontation between Aldrich and Isolde was fierce and bitter. Isolde, fueled by her hatred for Juliana and her unwavering loyalty to the Blackwell family, presented a convincing facade of injured innocence. She accused Juliana of manipulating Aldrich, of playing on his affections to gain power and influence. Aldrich, despite his doubts, found himself swayed by Isolde's passionate denials and her long-standing loyalty to his family. He wanted to believe Juliana. He desperately wanted to believe her, but the evidence, however circumstantial, pointed in Isolde's direction. Meanwhile, Juliana, with the help of Alara and Father Benedict, conducted her own investigation. They questioned servants, searched for any sign of Isolde's involvement, any scrap of evidence that might prove Juliana's innocence. Alara, using her network of contacts within the castle, discovered that Isolde had been seen meeting secretly with a scribe known for his skill in forging documents. The scribe, however, had disappeared, leaving no trace of his whereabouts. Father Benedict, using his access to the castle records, discovered that Isolde had recently withdrawn a large sum of money from the castle treasury, ostensibly for charitable purposes. But the recipient of the funds was unknown, and there was no record of the transaction. These discoveries, though circumstantial, strengthened Juliana's belief in Isolde's guilt. She presented her findings to Aldrich, pleading with him to see the truth, to recognize Isolde's deception. Aldrich listened, his heart torn. He was caught between his love for Juliana and his loyalty to his family, between his desire for justice and his fear of making a terrible mistake. He had loved and trusted Isolde's family, but he had also witnessed firsthand her animosity toward Juliana. Finally, he made a decision. He ordered a search of Isolde's chambers, a desperate attempt to find concrete proof, to resolve the conflict that was tearing him apart. The search was conducted by Gareth and several other trusted knights. They found nothing incriminating, no evidence that linked Isolde to the forged letter. Isolde, outraged by the intrusion, demanded an apology, claiming that she had been humiliated and slandered. She threatened to leave Blackwell Keep, to sever all ties with Aldrich and his paramour. She played the role perfectly. Aldrich, his hopes dashed, his doubts growing, felt a sense of despair wash over him. He had failed Juliana. He had failed to uncover the truth. He had allowed himself to be manipulated by whom?
He did not know.
As he was about to concede defeat, Gareth approached him, his face grim. "My lord," he said, "we found something not in Lady Isolde's chambers, but in the stables." He held out a small, silver locket, identical to the one Juliana wore, except this one contained a miniature portrait of Isolde, not Juliana's parents. And hidden behind that portrait a small, folded piece of paper. Aldrich took the locket and opened it. He unfolded the paper and read the contents. It was a draft of the forged letter, written in Isolde's handwriting. The proof they'd sought, hidden so cleverly, was in plain view. The dawn of reckoning had arrived. The truth, like the rising sun, dispelled the shadows of doubt and deception. Isolde's plan, hatched from spite and old hatreds, began to crumble around her. Chapter 18. Trials by Fire. The discovery of the draft letter in Isolde's locket was the final, damning piece of evidence. Aldrich, his heart filled with a mixture of rage and relief, confronted Isolde with the proof of her treachery. Isolde, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, initially denied the accusations, claiming that the locket had been planted, that Juliana was still manipulating Aldrich, even from her confinement. But when faced with the undeniable evidence of her handwriting, her denials faltered. She broke down, confessing her hatred for Juliana, her fear that the Thornwick woman would weaken Blackwell, would usurp Isolde's own position within the family. She admitted to forging the letter, to paying the messenger, to plotting to have Juliana banished or worse. Her confession was a bitter pill for Aldrich to swallow. He had trusted Isolde, had considered her family. To discover that she had betrayed him, had attempted to destroy the woman he loved, was a devastating blow. He ordered Isolde confined to her chambers, to await judgment. He then went to Juliana, his heart heavy with remorse and regret. He found her in the West Tower, sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She turned as he entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Juliana," he said, his voice choked with emotion. I have learned the truth. Isolde," she confessed. "She forged the letter. She plotted against you." Juliana nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. "I know," she said. "Ilara told me." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I am so sorry," he said. "I doubted you. I allowed myself to be deceived. I failed you." Tears welled up in Juliana's eyes, but she did not withdraw her hands. "You did what you thought was right," she said. "You sought the truth, even when it was painful." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and remorse. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "You were tested, Aldrich. We both were. And we survived." He rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "I love you, Juliana," he said. "More than words can say. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." She clung to him, her tears flowing freely now, tears of relief, of joy, of a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more resilient. The next day, Isolde was brought before the council. She was stripped of her rank and her possessions, and banished from Blackwell Keep forever. It was a harsh punishment, but a just one. Aldrich then addressed the council, his voice ringing with authority. He spoke of the importance of unity, of trust, of forgiveness. He spoke of his love for Juliana, of his intention to make her his wife, to unite their families, to forge a new future of peace and prosperity. His words were met with a mixture of applause and murmurs of dissent. But Aldrich stood firm, his resolve unwavering. He had made his choice. He had chosen love over hatred, peace over war, and he would not be swayed by the prejudices of the past. He looked at Juliana, who was by his side. He smiled, and she, in return, a silent acknowledgment of their trials and the future they were to build together. The fire had burned, but it had cleansed, not destroyed. Chapter 19. The Bond Forged. The weeks that followed Isolde's banishment were a time of healing and reconciliation. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over Blackwell Keep slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Aldrich's unwavering support of Juliana, his public declaration of his love for her, helped to quell the doubts and fears of those who had opposed their union. Preparations began for their wedding, a grand affair that would symbolize the joining of two families, the end of a long and bitter feud. Juliana, with Alara's enthusiastic assistance, oversaw the arrangements, choosing the colors, the flowers, the music, the menu, all the details that would make the day a celebration of their love and their commitment to a new future. She also began to take a more active role in the life of the castle, working alongside Aldrich to address the needs of his people, to resolve disputes, to promote peace and prosperity. She used her knowledge of Thornwick's traditions and customs to bridge the gap between the two communities, fostering understanding and cooperation. She visited the lands surrounding Blackwell Keep, meeting with the farmers, the merchants, the craftsmen, listening to their concerns, offering her support. She earned their respect and their trust, proving that she was not a conqueror, but a leader, a protector, a friend. Aldrich, in turn, made a formal overture to the surviving members of the Thornwick family, offering them compensation for their losses, inviting them to return to their lands, to rebuild their homes, to join with Blackwell in a new era of peace. Some accepted his offer, grateful for the opportunity to reclaim their heritage. Others remained wary, suspicious of his motives, clinging to the bitterness of the past. But Aldrich persisted, demonstrating his commitment to reconciliation, to healing the wounds of war. One evening, as Juliana and Aldrich were walking in the gardens, they came across Father Benedict, tending to the herbs and flowers. He looked up as they approached, a gentle smile on his face. "My lady, my lord," he said, "it warms my heart to see you together, to witness the blossoming of your love, the promise of a brighter future." "Thank you, Father," Juliana said. "Your guidance, your support have meant so much to us." "Indeed," Aldrich added, "you have been a true friend, a wise counselor, in these troubled times." Father Benedict bowed his head. "I am merely a servant of God," he said, "and I believe that love is the greatest force in the world, a force that can conquer hatred, heal wounds, unite even the most divided hearts." He looked at Juliana, his eyes filled with compassion. "My lady," he said, "I know the past has been painful, the losses you have suffered are immeasurable, but I believe that you are destined for greatness, that you have a vital role to play in shaping the future of this land." He turned to Aldrich. "And you, my lord," he said, "you have shown great courage, great wisdom, in choosing love over hatred, peace over war. You have a heavy burden to bear, but I believe that you will bear it well, with Juliana by your side." He then took Juliana's hand and placed it in Aldrich's. "May your union be blessed," he said. "May it bring peace and prosperity to your families, to your people, to this land. May your love be a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of a bond forged in the fires of adversity." His words were a benediction, a blessing on their union, a promise of a future they would build together, a future founded on love, trust, and a shared commitment to peace. The bond, tested and tried, was now forged, strong and unbreakable. The setting sun cast long shadows, but the two stood bathed in the golden light, their hands clasped, a picture of hope and a new beginning. Chapter 20. Beyond the battlefield. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect reflection of the joy and hope that filled Blackwell Keep. The castle was adorned with flowers, banners, and tapestries, the colors of Thornwick and Blackwell intertwined, symbolizing the union of two families, the end of a long and bitter feud. Juliana, dressed in a gown of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread, her hair adorned with flowers and pearls, looked radiant, her beauty enhanced by the happiness that shone in her eyes. Alara, her maid of honor, stood by her side, her own eyes filled with tears of joy. Aldrich, dressed in a tunic of dark blue velvet, his family crest emblazoned on his chest, waited for her at the altar of the castle chapel, his heart filled with a love so profound, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to his eyes. Gareth, his best man, stood beside him, a silent witness to the culmination of their journey, the triumph of love over adversity. The chapel was filled with guests, knights, nobles, servants, and commoners, all gathered to witness the union of Juliana and Aldrich, to celebrate the dawn of a new era. Father Benedict, his face beaming with joy, presided over the ceremony, his words filled with blessings and hope. As Juliana walked down the aisle, escorted by Sir Gareth, her eyes met Aldrich's. In that moment, all the doubts, all the fears, all the shadows of the past dissolved, replaced by a love so pure, so strong, that it transcended all barriers, all obstacles. They exchanged their vows, their voices clear and unwavering, their promises echoing through the chapel, a testament to their commitment to each other, to their families, to their people. They exchanged rings, symbols of their eternal bond, their unbreakable union. Father Benedict pronounced them husband and wife, and the chapel erupted in cheers and applause. Aldrich leaned in and kissed Juliana, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their love, their future, their destiny. The wedding feast was a grand affair, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Juliana and Aldrich sat at the high table, surrounded by their guests, their love a beacon of hope, a symbol of reconciliation. As the day drew to a close, Juliana and Aldrich stood on the battlements, overlooking the lands that were now united under their rule. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and red. "It is beautiful," Juliana said, her voice filled with awe. "Not as beautiful as you," Aldrich replied, his eyes filled with love. He took her hand and held it tight. "We have come a long way, my love," he said. "We have faced many trials, many obstacles, but we have overcome them all, together." Juliana nodded, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "We have," she said, "and we have built something beautiful, something strong, something that will endure." "Beyond the battlefield," Aldrich said, his voice filled with hope, "there is peace. Beyond the hatred, there is love. Beyond the division, there is unity. And beyond the past, there is a future, our future." They stood in silence, their hands clasped, their hearts united, their gaze fixed on the horizon, where the stars were beginning to appear, twinkling like diamonds in the velvet sky. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, their love a guiding light, their bond unbreakable, their destiny intertwined. They looked at each other, and the silent promise of forever passed between. Epilogue. Years passed, and the union of Juliana and Aldrich proved to be not just a symbol of peace, but a catalyst for lasting prosperity and understanding between Thornwick and Blackwell. The scars of the past, though not entirely erased, faded with time, replaced by a new generation that knew only unity and cooperation. Juliana and Aldrich ruled wisely and justly, their combined strengths creating a leadership that was both compassionate and strong. They rebuilt Thornwick, restoring it to its former glory, and they fostered trade and alliances with neighboring lands, creating a realm of peace and abundance. They were blessed with children, a son and a daughter, who inherited the best qualities of both their parents. The children grew up knowing the stories of their parents' trials, of the love that had overcome hatred, of the bond that had been forged in the fires of adversity. Alara remained at Blackwell Keep, serving as Juliana's trusted confidant and friend. She eventually married one of Aldrich's knights, a kind and honorable man, and they raised a family of their own, their lives intertwined with the lives of their lord and lady. Father Benedict continued to serve as chaplain at Blackwell Keep, his wisdom and guidance a source of comfort and inspiration to all. He witnessed the blossoming of the love between Juliana and Aldrich, the growth of their family, the flourishing of their realm, and he knew that his prayers had been answered. Sir Gareth, initially wary of Juliana, eventually came to respect and admire her, recognizing her strength, her integrity, her unwavering commitment to peace. He remained Aldrich's loyal friend and advisor, a steadfast presence in their lives. As for Renard and Isolde, their names became synonymous with treachery and betrayal, cautionary tales whispered in the halls of power. Their fates remained shrouded in mystery, lost to the annals of history, a reminder of the darkness that had been overcome. Juliana and Aldrich, in their later years, often walked together in the gardens of Blackwell Keep, the same gardens where they had shared stolen moments, whispered secrets, and forged their unbreakable bond. They would sit by the stone fountain, their hands clasped, their hearts filled with gratitude for the life they had built together, the love that had endured, the peace that had prevailed. And as the sun set on their long and fulfilling lives, they knew that their legacy would live on, a testament to the power of love, of forgiveness, of reconciliation. Their story would be told and retold, a beacon of hope for generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even amidst the fiercest of battles, love could conquer all. They smiled at each other, content and at peace, their final years a gentle reflection of the enduring power of their love.
Th.